of footsteps, noises in the night. Something's burning, fire burning bright. Keeps getting closer, chills me to my soul. They've come to get me, hear the devil call. The dead are after me. I said the dead are after me.
Welcome to the Septic Shock road trip, where we continue our state-by-state trip across the United States, one state at a time, one or maybe two or three horror movies at a time. And we started off last time in Maine. We did Pet Sematary, unfortunately. And this time, we're kind of
before we jump in, Clive, let me just sort of.
Okay.
You want to introduce? First of all, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Clive. He's Ron.
Hi, I'm Ron. I did want to mention. I want to ask. I asked you this personally, but off camera. But I think maybe it's worth maybe mentioning. Here we are in their second episode. Maybe mentioning. Can you maybe talk about a little about the Septic Shock Roadshow title? Because I know that you said it refers to the rhyming English rhyming slang, right? Which is
right. Well, I know it's one of those things. I'd rather you either get it or you don't, kind of thing.
Right. Oh, okay. Is septic shock like a common rhyming slang for British people?
Not septic shock. The shock is particular to this because we're talking horror films. But
right.
Septic is, yeah.
Oh, is it? Okay. Because for those of us non-Brits, I have to say that Cockney rhyming slang is just like gibberish. It's just like it's completely like impenetrable, like made up language. So I.
But I like the sound of Septic Shock Road Trip.
Sure. Yeah.
It's a.
So what does septic mean?
Well, no, because then I have to explain it. I don't want to do it.
Well, just that word. Just you don't have to go into it too much.
Well, you either explain it or you don't. Right?
I forget though. Well, just for me.
I'll tell you off
there. Sorry, everybody. Sorry. So I apologize for this guy.
To explain. So anyway, we're here.
But apparently, septic is a word for Cockney rhyming slang, which is a way of speaking in England specifically. Did they use it in Wales?
No, it's Cockney. It's East End, right? It's East End.
It's just East End. It's only East End England.
Yeah, but I mean, everyone knows
in London
rhyming slang.
Okay, right, and then it's just like where they take a word in English and you rhyme it with some other random word, and then you use that word instead. Yeah, so.
Yeah, I mean, Cockney rhyming slang to begin with was, from what I understand, it was a way to speak freely criminals to speak freely in front of police, right? So
okay.
You say something and they wouldn't know what the hell you're talking about. But then of course people, and now it's, I don't think anyone actually uses any Cockney rhyming slang now to actually obfuscate the true meaning, apart from what I'm doing right now with this podcast. Right. But in general, everyone knows all the famous, dog and bone, phone, apples and pears, stairs, right? I don't think anyone's going like, what's that? Everyone pretty much, so it's used as an affectation,
right,
more than anything else. And I think as well, they have made new ones, because obviously these wouldn't have made sense back in the 19th century or whatever, but there's new ones people come up with sometimes just for fun. So for example, one of my favorites is to take it up the arse would be to take it up the shitter. So you'd take it up the Gary glitter. So it just becomes take it up the Gary. Gary, okay. Gary glitter, shitter, up the arse.
Right. Got it. Okay, yeah. Gary, okay.
Yeah. Anyway, so so we started off in Maine with Pet
Sematary. Anyway.
And nice try. And that was a little bit of an outlier. It's not really what this show is about. And I think today's show, dealing with New Hampshire, is a little bit more kind of in the wheelhouse of what I kind of want to do and the kind of films we want to talk about in this show.
Right. Okay.
Which probably fills your heart with dread, Ron, I would imagine. But yes, so I was looking around, okay, what represents New Hampshire, right? So every time we get to a new show, I look about and I choose something relevant, hopefully, a horror film, obviously. We might get into, if there's nothing appropriate, we might get into more SF fantasy-ish territory at some point on the trip, you never know. And ideally something quite regional and low budget and of course set and shot in the state in question if possible. And yeah, so and 60s to 80s kind of is the time frame I'm looking at. So this kind of fits into all those categories in a way. And looking at New Hampshire, I came across, I was reminded of this guy called Brett Piper. Now, Brett Piper has been a guy who's been kind of working away in the low budget trenches since the early 80s. I think even before then he was making, you know, little home videos and stuff. And most of his stuff is out of his home state of New Hampshire as well. Still working, he's still making kind of monster movies now as well. And he's also he's a bit of a do it all kind of guy. Like he does his own effects and stuff as well. He's very talented. He can do miniature and stop motion. He's done so this was with the one we're talking about today would have been his second feature, I guess, before this made this one called Mysterious Planet with stop motion effects and stuff. And so he's a talented fellow. I think he made some creature effects for some trauma movies as well, maybe. I think maybe one of the Class of Newcomb High films. Sorry, I'm just making a note of something here. I do apologize.
He's making a note of something.
Yes, there we go. And okay, hang on. I'm going to have to stop there. I won't stop the recording. I'm going to have to reply to this mail I just got so Eddie doesn't phone me 5,000 times. Let's see. We are mailing to let you know that you got the role for bank robbery and cold case. You got the job. 14th and 15th. Okay, let me just reply. I will edit this out, I think. Not very interesting thing I asked. Hello. Thanks. Got it. 5D.
We'll definitely keep that in. Hello, thanks, got it.
You have to reply to say that you've seen the mail, you see, otherwise he'll bother us for the rest of the day. So let me just make a note of that. Yeah. Okay, there we go. Looks like I've got a job on Monday and Tuesday.
Good on you.
Right. Yeah. So so Brett Piper. So I was looking around at which Brett Piper film, and there's only one within the kind of our wheelhouse that kind of fits the horror. He's most famous for, he was most famous. Do you remember a Trauma film, Ron? Because Trauma were famous for, you know, coming up with quite outrageous, memorable titles. Do you remember a title of theirs? A Nymphoid Barbarian in Dinosaur Hell? Does that ring a bell? Whether you saw it, do you remember the title? Well, that was a Brett Piper film. That was a Brett Piper film called Dark Fortress, which they added some new footage to and released it as Nymphoid Barbarian in Dinosaur Hell. And that was pretty good. I remember that being a pretty good film. So Brett Piper didn't really finish a film in 1983 called Dying Day. And this was shot in New Hampshire, right? So right. It's kind of, yeah. So me and Ron are talking about Dying Day, Dark Knight, and Raiders of the Living Dead, which are kind of the same film. And the way you can experience this yourself, viewers, get the Raiders of the Living Dead DVD, which includes all three versions of the film. and a commentary on Raiders of the Living Dead, which kind of makes sense out of all this puzzle, right? So first off, we watched Dying Day, which is 80 minutes long, and this is basically Brett Piper's original zombie film.
Mhm.
Yeah. So in this film, the kind of slightly unusual plot, actually, in a way. I was reading an interview with Brett Piper, and he was saying the reason he ended up making this film was originally he got together with like some investors, and the idea was to put out like a generic, like almost like a blank. You can imagine like a detergent box, and one would be like Dracula, Frankenstein, werewolf, zombie. That was the idea, and see what's
Right.
So this was his idea of a generic zombie film.
Really?
Which is kind of weird to me because it's a very non-generic zombie film.
Yeah.
It's got a kind of a strange plot, basically about this guy called played by Bob DeVoe, and he kind of turns up in a town one day, and he's run over by this nurse played by Donna Asali, and they form a relationship together slowly, and during the course of the film we discover that he's being hunted by zombies across the country, and basically this is his nemesis, who turns out to be his nemesis is the descendant of someone who I'm kind of blanking on this now, whipped a slave to death.
It's something to do with slavery and like someone who owned somebody, and it was just revenge for ancestors.
And the main character, the
misdeeds.
hero, his ancestor had slept with a woman who was then whipped to death, and then the ancestor. So it's basically it becomes an ancestral kind of
revenge.
feud. Yeah. And the way it manifests itself is this guy sends out these zombies to track down this last ancestor and kill him, and it's become like a cyclical thing, and he's almost resigned to it as well at some point. Like he's like almost contemplating suicide. Oh, what's the big, I kill this zombie, I got to go through this shit again, kind of thing. And she kind of tries to get him to fight back, which he does. Yada. And so first off, it's worth saying this initial version of Dying Day, which runs 80 minutes, which according to we'll get into this a bit later, how it changed, but originally it was only 60 minutes.
Oh.
When he delivered it, when Brett Piper delivered it to Sam Sherman, and then they said, well, it's not long enough for a feature, and then he added 20 minutes, which I'm guessing is the prologue stuff, right? There's stuff at the very beginning of the film that's supposed to take place in 1897.
Okay, yeah.
Which has a zombie resurrected, and there's like there's some nudity. There's like a topless woman.
Right.
I think maybe that was the stuff that was added, and then the film proper begins when he's stumbling down the road, right? So whatever the 60 or the 80 minutes, the thing that hampers this version of the film and makes it kind of difficult to judge is the quality is fucking shockingly bad.
Oh yeah, you can't really make almost anything.
I think it's shot in 16mm, and it's so dark you can hardly see anything. It's kind of a rough work print anyway. The sound totally drops out. There's no sound during the opening credits, which are quite nice looking opening credits, like semi-animated with like drawings and stuff, but you can't see it properly anyway because it's all so dark.
Right.
So, which when we get to the later versions, you actually get to see it properly. But so this version is very, 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 very dark. You can hardly see it at all. And I think that's a bit of a shame because I think of all the versions this went through, and I'm wondering what you think about this, Ron, this is the best version of this film. If you were able to see it properly, just from a filmmaking point of view.
Right.
What did you make of, in this version, what did you make of Dying Day?
Yeah, I mean, I think I texted you after like a few minutes. I was like, is this the best version we have? Because it's practically unwatchable in terms of it's just you can't tell what's going on. What is this?
Right.
It's so dark and undeveloped half the time. But I mean, as I think you've covered most of it, is that it was kind of a unique take on a zombie story, despite the fact that it's supposed to be a generic zombie movie. And yeah, I mean, I didn't hate it. I mean, after about 10 minutes, it sort of started to get a little bit more like the first 10 minutes was like that sort of like prequel, like it's in the, and that I was like, I couldn't understand what was happening or who they were talking about and then once it started the actual story, I was like, okay, I could get into it a little bit more and I could understand the thing. And then I think when I finished it and I understood what the idea was, then I went back and I watched the beginning again, just because because now I knew about because basically it's the kind of the explanation of the slave whipping kind of story going back. It's connected to that, but you don't really know who these people are or what they're talking about or what's happening. And it's so dark that you can't see anyway. Yeah, so when I went back, I sort of like, okay, now I sort of understand who this is supposed to be and what they're talking about. Right. Once you understand what the kind of the basis of the story is, kind of thing, right? So, but it was okay. It was just it was
tacked on though, right? You can tell,
it was different quality. It was a different, it was obviously. I thought it was almost like I think I said it was like a Frankenstein movie in terms of that. It looked like it was several movies kind of pieced together, which, as we'll talk about, this actually then does actually become, right? So
yeah. But I think on this, it's a shame in a way you would, if you could edit together. Well, I suppose you. I don't know if you could edit together the Dying Day cut, maybe even the original 60-minute one. Just get rid of that shit at the beginning. Just the 60-minute and in a better quality, with sourced from Dark Knight. Or it's quite so. I found it quite charming. Like I like the two leads, for example. They're quite good together.
Yeah, they're okay. They weren't too bad. They were earnest, trying hard. I thought the woman, what was her name again?
Donna Asali.
Yeah, I thought she had like sort of an early Sigourney Weaver vibe to her. She reminded me a little bit of like a 80s, 70s, 80s Sigourney Weaver a little bit.
You mean she had a perm?
No, she had this sort of because I read a lot about Sigourney Weaver. I used to read a lot when I was in theater school. I used to
the beginning, shouldn't I? I've just switched it to gallery view.
Okay. Oh, whoops. Okay.
I know, work in progress.
Okay. Well, mine's been on a gallery the whole time, so I don't know. Anyway, well, I used to study a playwright named Christopher Durang a lot. And Christopher Durang was a comedy playwright, which I was a big fan of. And he used to work with Sigourney Weaver a lot in the 70s and 80s, and like in theater and stuff like that. So I was sort of like interested in early Sigourney Weaver, sometimes like kind of pre-Alien and all that kind of idea. So it reminded me kind of she has a sort of earnestness that people just think of her kind of as Ripley now from Alien now, kind of, but she has like a whole other side to her a little bit. So she's really kind of
what's Christopher Durang most famous for?
He did a couple of movies, but most of he's mostly a playwright. He's done a couple kind of I don't know if he
theater wise.
Baby with the Bathwater, sorry. He's still producing. There's one was called like
I said you're looking at a shelf.
Yes, I am. Yeah, so I'm trying to remember, but I directed a couple. Oh, I mean, one of his famous is he's famous for really short plays. He has a one act called The Actor's Nightmare, which is a pretty famous one that it's done a lot of festivals and stuff. Anyway, I don't think he's a particularly hugely famous playwright outside of theater circles, I think so, but he's very successful in.
Is he a little bit of a kind of a big name at the time and forgotten a little bit kind of figure now, or
perhaps he writes mostly like kind of absurdist comedies. Okay. This is very off tangent, I think, right? Or a tangent, not off tangent, but it's but he mostly does absurdist comedies and a lot of short plays and stuff like that. So was well respected, I think, in the 80s and 90s, and he still produces plays. I have a couple of his newer plays. One's called like Sonia. I can't remember his like four names. Sonia, Vanya, Sonia, Masha, and Spike is another one. Is his new one. But anyway, things like that. So he's still being produced. So I don't know how respected he is in the theater community in general these days. But
no, it's just a bit of bonus content because I wasn't familiar with him, so I'm guessing a lot of other people listening wouldn't watching in this case.
Yeah, I've directed a couple of his plays in the past. I directed a version of The Action Nightmare and another one which was like a parody of A Christmas Carol called Mrs. Bob Cratchit's Wild Christmas Binge. As it when I it was quite funny. Anyway, so my point was that he went to, I believe, the Yale School of Drama with Sigourney Weaver, and he writes a lot about his early work working with Sigourney Weaver in the theater, where she sort of has this real like earnestness to her performances, and so I got that a little bit from this actress. She was really she was trying hard, I mean, she wasn't just some, she did her best with the script of these. Yeah, the both of them were trying.
Well, what I liked as well was it had, I always appreciate when you're making these kind of low budget horrors, having a healthy sense of humor all helps, right? And one bit that made me laugh out loud. So they go and see the Three Stooges as well in the theater, and they can't show the Three Stooges. You just hear the noises, right? And there's a couple of kids down the front doing the moves, poking the eyes. You know what they're looking at. But later on in the film, when he tries to disappear and she tracks him down and she finds him in a Three Stooges theater, and there's narration, right? And she tracked me down and I didn't expect that. And he says something, I'm paraphrasing, but something along the lines of, and it was a Joe Besser shot, so I didn't mind being interrupted. And that made me laugh because yes, I've always really hated Joe Besser's Three Stooges shorts. He just doesn't fit in. I don't know how familiar you are with, but
not much. I don't. Yeah.
Joe Besser was like, famous for he wouldn't be slapped around like the others. Like he was like, well,
oh really?
Yeah, I wouldn't get slapped around. So whenever you watch the Three Stooges with Joe Besser, he just does this. He does his own very camp kind of thing. He just goes, woo! And the others are slapping each other around. He's just off there going, woo! And it's just, why this is not.
What did Joe Besser do again?
Woo! Woo! He's very kind of.
Sorry. One more time.
Go away, Ron. So actually, I kind of look a bit like Joe Besser. So little gags like that here and there, I appreciated, like sly humor, and so as a and like we said, the story's different, and the effects, even though the effects aren't the best effects in the world, you can tell they've gone to the trouble to actually try and make effects. Right?
They tried, yeah. I mean, the zombie masks or whatever, they obviously look like a mask or something, but they look like, what you would do if you and I were going to make a zombie movie and we're like, hey, how do we make some zombie makeup? Yeah, it was real like a DIY kind of.
He did something.
People got together and made a movie.
I'd be proud, There's even an exploding zombie head as well at one point, and so I'd say overall, if you could see the fucking thing properly, it's not bad, right? It's not bad.
Yeah.
It's
I can see by the end of the first one, it was like, oh, this was okay. It was kind of interesting. So.
Yeah. So then,
yeah.
So as we mentioned, Brett Piper sold his footage to Sam Sherman. Sam Sherman's most famous for running Independent-ish International, and I suppose his association with the films of Al Adamson. We'll probably get to Al Adamson at some point on our road trip when we get over to the West Coast. So basically, Brett Piper sold his, and they said, well, number one, they said, this is not long enough for a feature, so he added the 20 minutes. And then after that, they just said, well, this isn't going to work. This is just, and so Sam Sherman started to prepare his version and his kind of interim version, and I'm a bit unclear as to why this got interrupted, but he started putting together this version called, which is on the DVD, it's 72 minutes long, called Dark Knight. And this, even more than Dying Day, is a kind of rough cut, right? There's a few bits where there's no sound at all, and you can hear the director saying cut and action in some scenes.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously unfinished, right? Because
Yeah.
like it seemed like I'll be completely honest here. I didn't make it all the way through this movie. I kind of fast forwarded through it.
Okay,
Because
you had already watched
it. Huh?
You had already watched it once. So.
I already watched it basically anyway. So I was like, well, this is very, very similar. And it didn't seem like it, yeah, like you could hear the director say cut. And it seemed like there's no music, at least in the parts that I watched. There was no music or any sound at all, except for it sounded like they were just doing the overdubbing of the lines themselves. So it would be like silence, silence, silence. And I was like, I was listening to it with headphones, and I was like, I thought maybe there's something wrong with my headphones. And then it would go, hello, and it'd be silence again, right? Like, yeah, so it was a bit irritating to watch like that. So I watched a bit, and then I kind of fast forward, I kind of got the idea of it, but it's very similar to the first.
It's only on the disc to kind of show the evolution of the product, right?
Right. And so
in Dark Knight, the footage has been processed properly. So now it's clear and bright, and it's not HD or anything, but it looks good enough. And I can't for the life of me really figure out, well, if you were able to process the footage that well, I'm not quite sure what Sam Sherman's problem with the original Dying Day was, really. I mean,
I don't know anything that's happened with this situation, but I did think I was kind of interested to watch these three. I agreed to do it because I thought it's interesting to see like the evolution of a film, like how it started, and then they changed a little bit and they changed a little bit more. And then that's kind of what they ended up releasing was Raiders of the Living Dead. But it seemed almost like they were like doing Brett Piper dirty is what it seemed like. Like they're sort of like he made this movie and they're like, oh, well, we don't really like it. Sorry. And then he goes, wait, okay, now let's make this into one. Let's just take his stuff and make our own movie with it, right? Well, it seemed almost like they were just taking his stuff and making their own, but not almost like
paid, I think.
And he didn't get paid, but he did get like a story credit on some of them. But,
no, he did get paid. They bought the footage from him. I don't.
Yeah. But I don't know. I just felt like there was. I don't know. I wasn't sure how he figured into why they made another version, or they, I'm sure it has to do with funding, or I don't know. The feeling was almost like they had taken his footage and then made their own movie using his footage. I don't know.
No, I don't think they necessarily did him wrong that way, but certainly artistic. I mean, I know Brett Piper doesn't like the Raiders of the Living Dead version. But so this in between version is it's kind of difficult to, because originally I thought what had happened was he'd sold it to Sam Sherman. Sam Sherman sat on the footage, and then I thought Brett Piper tried to modify his own footage to put out his own version, but that isn't. I was wrong about that. Basically, Dark Knight is Sam Sherman's first attempt at making Raiders of the Living Dead. So, some of the scenes have been slightly rearranged. The biggest difference is, so they got in what's his name? Did I not write his name down? That was a very silly thing to do, because now I can't remember. Bob Allen, who was an old B Western star, like back in the 40s and 50s. So they got him in to, and this is strange because, so in this version, he plays like in the original Dying Day, he gets knocked down on the road and then this woman picks him up, and then it plays out like that. But then in this version, later on he goes to, I think it's the Greenwich Village Halloween parade, I think is what it is. There's footage from this big Halloween parade, and he ends up, something happens to him there as well, and he ends up kind of on the street again, and this benevolent doctor takes him home, played by Bob Allen, and then he explains his story to the doctor, and then that flashbacks, and then we go to the Dying Day footage,
right?
And then there's some new stuff where they got Zita Johann out of retirement, who was in The Mummy back in the day with Boris Karloff, and it's the last credit she had. She plays a librarian who explains the history of some correctional facility, this old prison, and then he ends up going to this old prison, and then I don't really understand. It doesn't really explain. It's funny. You were saying it is interesting to see the evolution of this film, because you see what they were trying to do sometimes, and then so clearly at some point Sam Sherman had discovered this big old abandoned prison and rightly thought, fucking great production values for free. Let's shoot something in an abandoned old prison. Great.
Yeah.
So I can understand why they did that. But then they forgot to make it make any fucking sense. Like, there's, correct me if I'm wrong, if I missed anything, there's no connection, right, between, and then very briefly in this version, you see the character who was the nemesis in the Dying Day, he turns up and he's now the doctor's grandson. And so now the grandson is, and the grandfather, I don't know. But anyway, this prison thing is brought into the mix now, right? And nothing to do with the original film. So on the one hand, you have much better quality footage. I understand that. They found this great prison production values. But then in one fail swoop, they've totally gutted the narrative, right? I don't make sense at all.
So my guess is that's kind of why they ended up going to Raiders of the Living Dead, which is that they got all this footage, re-edited it, made another story, but then probably that's why they haven't even edited out all the cuts and all, and like the director speaking and hadn't put in the music yet and stuff, because they probably tested this and said, oh, wait a second, this doesn't make any sense.
Right.
Or maybe we have a better idea. Here's a better way to change the story. Let's just reshoot it and make a totally different movie. Let's just forget about this. And so my assumption this was just sort of like a stepping stone going to the Raiders of the Dead, which was like we don't need to finish this movie because it's just basically, it was almost like a way of selling, maybe trying to get more backers or more, in order to more money in order to make the better movie or something. It was almost like something that you show to someone to get more money to make a better movie or something. I don't know.
Yes, I think that's what it was. But interestingly, it's interesting, like you said, it is interesting to see the evolution, because if you watch it in this order, and when it gets to Raiders of the Living Dead, you kind of, even though ultimately they made a total hash out of a film that kind of did make sense and work in the first place, if you follow it chronologically, you kind of have a certain amount of sympathy because you see what they're trying to do, right? So they get to Raiders of the Living Dead, and this is the version that eventually came out in 1988. They're 85 minutes. This is the version I saw on video back in the day, and just thought, what the fucking hell is this? Like, had no idea about any of the back. Just thought this is kind of rubbish, really. And ultimately it is. But I have to admit, going through this journey and watching it this way makes it a lot more interesting in a way.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah. So,
I found that if I had watched Raiders of the Living Dead standalone, I would have had a lot more goodwill towards it. Just like, this is just a fun little 80s kind of silly, low budget gun. But the fact that I had to watch the same footage 3 times made me like, oh, I don't want to watch this anymore. I don't watch. So it made me more irritated when I watched it. So I think I liked it less because of the journey, because of that.
Funnily enough, even though I thought I was going to enjoy it more, because watching this version, watching that version, and then so the Raiders of the Living Dead also has commentary from Sam Sherman explaining like how the film came out. And then when I started watching the third film, and there's this whole new angle that they've added to it, I thought, oh yeah, I'm going to have more fun with this time as well. But it just doesn't work really. But like I said, you can see what they were trying to do, and it seems like fun. So the new thing they brought into it was, so it starts with this truck, and you can immediately see the new footage is, just in terms of professionalism, it's still very low budget, but it's shot a lot more dynamically, isn't it?
Yeah.
As a story and in terms of humor and characters, it's nowhere near as good as what Brett Piper was doing, I think.
Right.
But just in terms of this more cinematic dynamism, it starts with the camera on a truck and all this. You
can tell they have more money.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and the footage is better.
Not that much money, but
not much money, but they have more than Brett Piper had, which was probably almost nothing, right? So
right.
yeah, like you could tell that there was a little bit more money, there was a little bit more work put into it, and trying to make it more of like an actual movie kind of thing. But the problem is that now it looks like a real Frankenstein of a movie, because even though they've kind of updated some of the old footage, it's still not up to the level of some of the new footage. So it looks like that all the footage is like like wildly differing quality. So.
Right. Although I think when I first saw this film back in the day, I think it, if you didn't know, it kind of does feel of a piece in terms of it. You can imagine it was the same group that made the same film, and they just cobbled together. You know, it doesn't necessarily scream, "Oh, hang on, this is a different film," in a way like those ninja films where they edit in Caucasian ninjas into
right.
films. Though it doesn't jump out like that,
Right.
But yeah, so in this version, a tanker truck full of radioactive material is hijacked by this terrorist who wants some people released from prison, otherwise he's going to blow up this tanker truck. And so the original star of Dying Day, Bob DeVoe, turns up. Did you notice? He's now a cop.
Comes back.
Yeah, looking older. Because they've pretty much cut out all his stuff from the film, right? So you don't notice, hang on, that's the same actor playing the same guy. All that stuff is gone. There's not much that survives of Dying Day, really. And then they've added in this new stuff then where Bob Allen's role has extended. So now he's still a benevolent doctor, but now he's not in league with the bad guy. He's a benevolent doctor, and then when he goes home, he's also the grandfather of a little boy played by Scott Schwartz, right? Scott Schwartz, who was the star of The Toy with Richard Pryor.
Right.
He was the kid who controlled. Actually, I've never seen The Toy. I'm guessing you probably.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I thought about doing The Toy on our other podcast for a while now. I was thinking about doing that. So.
Right. It's interesting. The Toy seems to be one of those films, just reading about it, where it seems more interesting now than when it was new. Because I think when it was new, it came out and everyone just figured along the lines of, oh, Richard Pryor, yeah, he's a popular comedian, why not cast him in this film? Whereas I think now you watch it, it seems weird that you have a film about a privileged white boy given a black man
owning a black man. Owning a black man. Yes.
So yeah, I'm kind of more curious to see The Toy now than I ever have been before, I think. So if you're planning to rewatch it, let me know, because I'm kind of keen to. It's a remake as well.
I used to love that movie when I was a kid, so I was thinking about doing
it's a remake, isn't it, of a French film, I think.
Is it? I don't know about that, but.
So anyway, you got this, and so now Scott Schwartz, who did later go on to be in porno as well.
Oh, really?
At first as in porno in non-sex roles, but I think he did end up performing in some roles as well at some point. So he's kind of had an interesting career from The Toy, Raiders of the Living Dead, porn. He'd probably be interesting to sit down and have a beer with. I think,
right. Yeah. He's got some stories.
Yeah. So, and he makes his grandfather's Laserdisc player. Well, they call it a Laserdisc player at first, but then they call it a video recorder later. So I'm a little bit confused. But Laserdisc player kind of makes more sense in so much as it actually doesn't make any sense, but.
Sorry to cut you off. He was also in A Christmas Story. He was Flick in The Christmas Story. He was one of the other kids in Christmas Story. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I forgot that. Yeah.
Interesting. So he creates a laser gun out of he cannibalizes the Laserdisc footage, and then blah 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 blah. Prison.
He makes a laser gun out of his grandfather's Laserdisc player.
And there's more footage of this prison, and they use a laser gun to fight back against zombies.
Fight the zombies. Yeah.
So it has changed quite a bit from
Yeah,
Dying
yeah.
Day. I mean, it's almost a totally different thing, really.
Yeah.
To the point where you have to wonder, well, how expensive would it have been to reshoot the stuff from Dying Day? Like, I'm not sure if they.
Well,
it's interesting. It's this kind of.
That's why I had the idea that maybe they did him dirty, was because they just took his stuff and basically the only thing that remains is the basic idea of sending zombies after a guy, right? Right? I mean,
right. For which
yeah. So I mean,
story credit, like you said, yeah.
So you got to. That's why you got a story credit. But other than that, it seemed like that was it. That was all that really remained of the original movie, right? So
yeah, and we're only really getting that, I feel, because we've already watched 2 iterations of it. I think if you go into this cold, it's a lot more confusing. Like, you would actually fully.
I still don't even know who the bad guy was at the end. It was a doctor, but it wasn't the.
Suddenly, it's like,
it wasn't.
I'm the. Who the fuck are you? Where did you go?
I remember I stopped because there's one scene where she's tied up by the bad guy in the prison, and he goes and he rescues her, and then it cuts the scene and goes, "Can you believe it was the doctor the whole time?" And I was like, "Wait a second, it was who?" So I thought I'd missed something, so I actually went back at like 10 minutes and watched it. I was like, "No, I didn't miss it." She just suddenly that's how you reveal. That's how you reveal who the villain was for saying, "Can you believe it was Nantuka all the whole time?" Or something.
I was half expecting the next line to be, "I would have got away with it too. It would feel pesky kid."
And I still don't even know who that was. It wasn't the benevolent doctor though? Was it someone else?
No idea.
It was some other person, right? It was just some random person.
So this stuff as well, the Raiders of the Living Dead stuff, was shot in New Jersey as well.
Yes, so it wasn't completely New Hampshire. I didn't.
But that's why we included Dying Day, because if we'd have just had Raiders of the Living Dead, it wouldn't have worked.
Right.
And everyone would have written and complained, obviously.
Right, complaining letter, yeah. So.
But now we got out of that one. So yeah, I think Dying Day works perfectly well, and I can imagine if Dying Day if you could actually see it, if they turned up at a drive-in as part of a triple bill at some point back in the day, I don't think you would have been disappointed. You would have gone, that was good.
It was all right.
They had a dig at Joe Messer, that's pretty good. And but then this end result it's fascinating to see how it got there, like incrementally got shitter and shitter. But you also get to see how they were trying to make it better. It's quite interesting to see how it diverges, like, because you are
right.
I don't think it's I don't think like Sam Sherman, what the fuck you're thinking? Like, that's a good idea. Oh yeah, I can see what you're doing. But somehow it just got away from them, right? And it's just the end result is just, I mean, yeah, I remember back in the day, I think it was terrible. And my friend Darren, who does the Achavuz, I remember he'd seen it years ago. He'd rented it from a video shop when he was a kid. And I remember seeing it in the video shop and go, "Oh, what's this?" And he was like, "Oh, don't watch that. That's shit, that is." Like, so I was warned away from it, and eventually saw it, and then I had to agree. Yep, you were quite right. That was pretty terrible. But I would say if you can pick up the DVD at a reasonable price, and I think it is still around, second hand, and if you're interested in kind of low budget filmmaking and low budget horror filmmaking and region and how these things happen, it's quite, I think you can have an instructive day or two, stretch it out. Just watching the different iterations, listen to the commentary, and it's kind of fun to see how this changed over the years, right?
Yeah, I wish there was a little bit more information about like why they used what they did and why they changed what they did, So, but Sam Sherman doesn't say anything about that on the commentary.
No, there's not a hell of a lot more. I mean, he makes, there's certain things that he says sometimes where he says, like sometimes he says, "Oh, this just didn't work, so we had to do this." But to my mind, it seems like it does work. So I don't really know what he's talking about. But
probably worked better than what you did yourself. So
yeah. So it's funny. It's one of those things where now that the dust has settled, I could imagine Brett Piper and Sam Sherman, maybe shaking hands and maybe they have,
right.
They have to, in fact, in order to get the rights for this DVD to be put together.
Right. Of course, yeah. Sure.
But it is it is kind of an interesting, and I thought it would make for an interesting little chat.
Mm.
Yeah, and that's about all I've got to say about Dying Day, Dark Knight, Raiders of the Living Dead. Is yeah, you might not be very interested if you're just a casual film goer, but you know,
Right.
kind of a little bit interested in how these things work out sometimes, and little low budget horror. It's kind of a fun little yeah. Would you
It
agree?
was interesting to see the process anyway. So
Yeah. I can't say I'd be rushing out to watch Raiders of the Living Dead any time again.
No, I don't think so. Yeah.
But
Although that's a great song though. The dead arrived to me.
yeah, well, we will have heard that hopefully at the head of the show, so people
Right.
will know what we're talking about. Because of course, as well as being about regional, are we done talking Raiders of the Living Dead?
I guess so. Yeah.
As well as talking regional horror, I also like to indulge in our state by state, not only journey through horror films, we also do state by state journey of 60s garage rock. So representing New Hampshire, particularly Concord, New Hampshire. This is Jay Goon and the Belvederes, and on Fleetwood Records, 1966. This is Beware, and this is Goodbye from me, Clive.
And for me, Ron.
And let's take it away, Jay Goon and the Belvederes.